Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships and healing from narcissistic relationships. So, been talking about fawning because fawning is such an important thing to understand narcissistic relationships. So, sometimes as you learn about fawning and you do the work of the trauma work and you connect to yourself somatically, you may actually find that you're not fawning as much. But when you stop fawning, you might find that you're being called difficult. So let's take that on. So developing healthy assertiveness is very difficult for survivors of narcissistic abuse. You may have even had it before the relationship, that healthy assertiveness, but then years of having any needs shamed, any asks being viewed as excessive, well, that's bad enough. If you were raised with a narcissistic parent, you may have also developed a fawn response in the face of the subjugations and the invalidations that were happening in your relationship with your parent. The fawn response is observed, manifested, but observed, when a person behaves in a manner in which it's almost as though you are trying to win the narcissistic person over, be what they want you to be, sort of appease them, soothe them. The fawn response is a trauma and a safety response. It's designed to maintain a connection with the narcissistic or harmful caregiver or parent or adult. Fawning is not a conscious process. So when people characterize fawning as being seductive or manipulative, that is patently untrue. It is a sympathetic nervous system level response. It is meant to make us safe. However, many people will sometimes experience shame because they have a fawn response with narcissistic parents and with other people throughout their lives. It's as though people who are having this fawn response feel somehow complicit in the narcissistic person's behavior. And I say this as someone who has a lot of a fawn response in me. And interestingly, as I promote the book, I will sometimes be met, even in an online event, certainly in person, when people are asking me lots of questions. But I sometimes feel compelled to give in when a group of people is around me and asking questions and answer the questions of the person first who feels the most threatening to me. I don't know what makes them threatened. Maybe they're entitled. Maybe it's something about the expression on their face. But after it happens, I'm incensed at myself afterwards because that is precisely the person I did not want to yield to, or maybe not even get to their question. I can even feel the physiological sensation that compels that fawn in me. And then by engaging in that fawn response, it's me again, behaving in line with that sympathetic nervous system call. The fawn response can be another driver in that whole agreeableness paradox I recently talked about in another video. Fawners by nature can seem accommodating, yielding, and that they will, in a way, it seems like they're trying to be engaging and be the best possible supply. Now, breaking out of the fawn response is no small task, and stay tuned to that because my colleague and dear friend, Dr. Ingrid Clayton, has a book coming out about precisely this issue, which is going to be quite amazing. But to break out of the fawn response is literally an act of sympathetic nervous system defiance. It's about taking an uncomfortable path, in essence, not fawning. And here's the problem, though. You do the work, you get the therapy, but when you slowly stop fawning, especially when the people around you are accustomed to it, and even if they're not narcissistic, and then you switch it up and actually make appropriate asks, you make your needs known, you ask people to do a job that they were supposed to do, or make a deadline, or answer a question you asked, just getting out of the fawn, narcissistic recovery, I can't make a need known headspace is big enough to actually make the ask. But something that I am seeing happen to people is that when they make the ask, they're being branded as difficult, right? And this is one of the most painful and setbacky things that can happen to a survivor, especially to somebody who's traditionally been a fawner. And I have to say that as I went through the process of 6 months of assiduously promoting a book that improbably ended up getting recognized, that in a strange way only happened because I had to do the work and actually do the work of keeping that fawn response in check, and I found myself at times having to be demanding. I would feel sick to my stomach when I made these asks of people in terms of promoting the book, and would afterwards ruminate and ask myself, was I wrong? Should I not have done that? Maybe I wasn't nice enough, and on and on and on. But the hardest part wasn't just the asking. It was when I was treated as though I was being unreasonable and difficult. I felt exhausted all the time for those months, because just making the ask was hard enough. But to then be called or treated as though I was difficult was very tough. And then, like any good self-doubter, I would take those emails and text to other people and say, am I wrong with what I asked? Did I do something wrong? And bless many of these patient people around me, they would say, not at all. You should have asked for more. So the fawner's fear, in many ways, is to be called or be characterized as difficult. Because to be called or characterized as difficult, it carries with it a massive opportunity cost. And that opportunity cost is to lose attachments and connections and relationships and love. It's really to be abandoned, and those are very high stakes. So that's when we enter catch-22 territory. Fawners feel shame for fawning, and they wish they would have stood up for themselves, or at the very least, not fawned. So then there's no winning. If you stand up for yourself, you're labeled difficult. If you fawn, you feel shame. So those of us who are indoctrinated and learn to fawn and accommodate and never be a bother, we don't just, through our responses, make a narcissistic person's life easier. We make everyone's life easier. The fawner's easy breezy, I don't want to be a bother approach to life makes life very easy for the folks around us. And in a way, we are kept in place by the fears of what would happen if we were to make our needs known. Because invariably, if you do make your needs known, someone's going to think you're being demanding or difficult for asking very basic things, like expecting someone to do their job, or show up on time, or pay what they promised, or respond to your question. It's not as though most of you are making any kind of rock star demands. Your asks are often quite simple. But these simple asks, and the asks that come up when you are being assertive, which is often required to achieve at most jobs or careers, can seem insurmountable when you have experienced a history of narcissistic abuse. And we can often hold back on doing it when we get the pushback and the characterization of our asks, particularly if we're making an insistent or an assertive ask, as us being demanding or difficult. This sort of accommodation, the providing narcissistic supply, the going along, the being the good girl, the good guy, the good person, it's a very difficult legacy of narcissistic abuse. And people looking in at you from the outside may not peg it as such. They may praise you for being flexible and accommodating. But all of your flexibility and accommodation are often not reciprocated. And other people will have no problem doing what you ask in the name of holding their boundary, but are so used to your flexibility that they hold you to a different standard. The thought of being thought of as difficult or being branded as difficult can be very destabilizing for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Not the least of why is because it can feel gaslighty. It can raise more self-blame, more self-doubt, and even leave us wondering if we are the narcissistic ones. It can throw people backwards from their tentative attempts to advocate for themselves or to assert themselves. But we already know how the story turns out if we just sit quiet and don't do anything. If we keep ourselves silent and keep orienting to being what they want. So as my friend Ingrid said to me, when I told her that I was having the repeated experience of being told I was difficult for making some asks around book promotion and other asks I was making professionally, she said to me basically, own it. Now, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do that, and being seen as difficult is always going to be difficult for me. But for any of you who have had that experience of being fawners and pleasers and appeasers and accommodators, who finally stretch, who ask for what you need, who reach for a dream and get shut down as difficult, remember this. Maybe this is how narcissistic people get shit done. And maybe it's time we take a page out of their playbook. But the real truth is that it is easier for folks to shut you down and characterize you as demanding, rather than to do the things that you ask of them. So, slowly but surely, you can transition out of that fawn. But be careful, because on the other side of that is when we stop fawning, is the day we get called difficult. Thanks again.